Hi, this is Kim Hammer, pastor, Saline Baptist Church, community of Tull outside Benton, with your devotion taken from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 12, and we're going to look at verse 8 and 9. Moses is continuing to encourage the nation of Israel. They have defeated the kingdoms on the east side of Jordan, and they are in a position or staging area, if you would, preparing to go over into the promised land. And part of what he is sharing in chapter 12 and verse 8 is regarding their attitude during this time. We find that verse 8 says, "You are not to do as we do here today, everyone as he sees fit, since you have not reached the resting place and the inheritance the Lord your God has given you. But you will cross the Jordan and settle in the land the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, and he will give you rest from your enemies around you so that you will live in safety." As I mentioned, they are in a staging position, preparing to cross over the river Jordan, and of course Moses is going to be taken to the eternal promised land, and the nation of Israel is going to go into the promised land. But what's interesting in verse 8 is that he says, "You're not to do as we are doing here today." Moses understood and God understood that before they went into the conquest to take the promised land, that they needed a time to rest. And they just finished a campaign taking out all the enemies on the east side of Jordan, so 2.5 tribes could inherit that portion of land. But Moses understood that before they went in, and he had to have that time in order to share with them the specific things God wanted to remind them of, but they were in a position where they were resting and gearing up to go over into the promised land and confront those nations they were going to have to push out. And so Moses is saying, it's okay to rest for now, but he's going to go on and also tell them that you need to be prepared to go into the land and chase out the enemy. And I find that there's a spiritual analogy to that, and that is while we are here in this time waiting for us to be called or to go into the eternal promised land, that God does want us to rest. He understands that our body needs times to rest and to replenish its energy. Jesus even did that during his personal ministry, where he retreated in order to take care of his physical needs so he could be spiritually everything he needed to be. But he didn't find complacency in staying down forever. And that's one of the dangers, especially during this time of COVID, that we don't go into a period where that we think that we can just be complacent in the place that we are in. God designed it for a period of rest. God designed it for a period of restoring our strength. But we can't be content in that position forever. We have to be ready to gear up. In fact, he said in the second part of verse 8, everyone as he sees fit. So everyone was taking care of their business. They were spending time with their family. They were doing everything they needed to do between the campaigns. But Moses said, don't get used to it, nor do you need to stay content to be in this position. And as God's children, as we are here on this earth and we're preparing to go into the promised land for eternity, there are periods of time where we need to rest, but there's also times when we need to gear up and go in and face the enemy and go on the conquest to take from the territory of the enemy what God wants us to claim for him. He goes on and says, "Since you have not reached the resting place and the inheritance the Lord your God is giving you." Our final resting place is not here. Our final resting place is in eternity in heaven. And while we have to go on the campaign and we have to go on the conquest in order to take the land from the enemy, we also have to remember to give ourselves rest, but not to stay complacent in that period of rest forever, that we still have job to do. And our final resting, when we can finally find what we're looking for, is not ever going to be found on this earth. It's going to be found in heaven. He goes in verse 10 and says, verse 9, but he says, "Since you have not reached the resting place and the inheritance the Lord your God is going to give you, but you will cross the Jordan and settle in the land the Lord your God has given you as an inheritance, and he will give you rest from all your enemies around you so that you will live in safety." When we get to heaven, we're going to be delivered from our enemies and we'll have to fight them no more. But right now, we've got to fight the enemies of the truth, and we have to fight the enemies of God, and we have to go in and possess that which the Lord has given us by his power and by his might. And until we get done with the job and go home to heaven, God expects us to fight for his word, and he expects us to proclaim his word, and he expects us to deal with the enemy until finally, when we get to heaven, we can find a place of eternal rest where we're free from our enemies, the enemies of God forever. Until then, fight on.